Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining our public policy forum today. I would like to introduce myself. I am Brett Waite, the Chair of Public Policy, and I would like to introduce Tom Berg Jr., my Vice Chair. Hi, Tom.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So the forum topic today is utilizing local advocacy resources to further housing supply. So we have three great panelists here today that I would like to introduce to you. We have Shauna O'Shaughnessy from, she is the CEO at Community Housing Improvement Program. We have Lyric Kelkar, Policy Director at Inclusive Action. And we have Rich Discoli, CEO at Pacific Southwest Association of Realtors. So can we start with you, Shauna, and give us just a brief description about your background?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. I am Shauna O'Shaughnessy, and congratulations on pronouncing my name.
I worked on that.
Yes. I am the president and CEO of Community Housing Improvement Program, CHIP. We are an affordable housing developer serving 9 counties in the North State. We create both rental housing communities and single family homeownership opportunities. Most of our advocacy work, to be honest, is done in partnership with affordable housing coalitions with a focus on rural housing. But also more recently, because our region has been hit so hard by wildfires, much of what I talk about today will probably have a disaster focus.
Great, thank you, Shauna. And Lyric, can you give us a brief background on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Lyric Kelkar. I'm the policy director at Inclusive Action, as Brett very kindly introduced me as. Inclusive Action for the City is an organization that does community and economic development work, and especially coalition building is really what my focus is on, and both coalition building as well as advocacy work to support low-income entrepreneurs and build local economies that really support the people who make up the backbone of our neighborhoods. And this is done in conjunction with many other the coalition work we do is really done in conjunction with many other organizations who are experts in other fields as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Great, thanks, Lyric. Okay, and on to you, Rich.
Hi, I'm Rich Discoli. I'm the CEO of the Pacific Southwest Association of Realtors, and we're located in San Diego County. And my personal mission is to empower others to achieve more. And it's great. I love my personal mission is tied into our organizational mission, which is to empower realtors. And I think right now, what our realtors want to do is they want to really kind of advocate for home ownership and private property rights. And we kind of provide the tools and the organization to help them do that.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here. We know that you are busy, and we as realtors are excited to get more information on how we can work together to help this housing crisis. So let's move on to our first question, our opening question. The purpose of today's panel is to discuss the importance of local advocacy with a focus on the need to expand coalition building efforts by creating new and untraditional allies to promote and in turn develop housing in California. So our first question, I'd like to begin by asking each of you to share 2 experiences where you have engaged in mobilization efforts. So let's start with you, Shauna.
Okay, so I think the most critical piece of advocacy that I've been engaged in over the last couple of years has been around Paradise Community Village. It was our multifamily project that burned in the Camp Fire. It is a low-income housing tax credit project, and under IRS guidelines, it had to be rebuilt within 25 months or we had to pay back the tax credits and our investors. So when our initial request to the IRS for an extension was denied. We thought it was a no-brainer, but it wasn't. We launched into full-blown advocacy, pulling in our elected officials, local representatives from the town of Paradise, local media, community partners, state housing organizations, and national housing organizations. We got multiple denials, but ultimately we got the extension under a suite of COVID relief that they issued. And this was in response to a request that was made by one of our national partners who included our problem in their recommendations. And so it really was a great example of how that broad net of coalition building really got us the result that we wanted. We still haven't had the long-term fix because we really don't want anyone else to go through this. And we'll continue to work on that. And then more recently, we're working on, in partnership with California Coalition for Rural Housing, AB 880, which is a revolving loan fund to get dollars into disaster impacted communities right after a fire so people can start rebuilding homes and multifamily and mobile home parks and get people housed more quickly while waiting for federal resources to come down.
Wow, great, thank you. Lyric or Rich, would you like to give some examples? Either one of you? You want to move forward, Lyric?
Sure. So inclusive action is it's very different than anything related to housing, but one of our biggest and most high profile campaigns has been the campaign to legalize street vending, actually across California and specifically in Los Angeles. And we've been in a number of other coalitions, but this one is really unique because we had a very singular goal, and that was to legalize street vending in Los Angeles. And it took over 10 years to make that happen. And it was through the efforts of centering the folks who are most impacted. So this would be street vendors, of course, and making sure we had the expertise across the board to make that happen. So Inclusive Action, we're kind of a grass tops organization. So we do a lot of connecting and collaboration with other organizations and elected offices, et cetera. But we had to have partnerships with like our law friends. So we have public interest lawyers, we have advocates, we have organizers on our team. And of course, we have street vendor leaders who are helping inform any of the policy. And that's really what made sure that we were able to be successful in this mission to legalize street vending. But within that didn't mean, it wasn't all successes, of course. There were moments where there were a lot of pushback, and there were times when we really had to think through what it meant to work with like brick and mortar businesses, for example, and figure out what those relationships look like and how we can ensure that those with the least access have the most resources and are brought at the forefront of an equitable program. So that's, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And what about you, Rich?
Recently, right pre-COVID, in 16, 17, some of the laws had changed around ADUs, and we made a big effort, and we partnered with a number of different organizations to kind of promote ADUs and get more of them built in San Diego County. We partnered with, for one project, we partnered with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, the City of San Diego, the San Diego Housing Federation, the ADU Coalition, and some others to promote ADUs. And we put the link in here. We created a handbook that's now posted on the city's website, to try to give, people who potentially build those ADUs, a resource, so they're not starting at ground zero. And we partner with some of the council members, and I think that's been a big success. The ADU growth in San Diego has been great. During the same thing, we also, in order to kind of push that issue out, we partnered with AARP, and we did a big event in one of our cities where we were working on getting, the ordinances changed there to be less restrictive. And we had a lot of pushback, when we were doing that. So in order to try to build community support, AARP was very supportive of ADUs. So they kind of partnered with us, and we did a big event. We had a couple hundred people come, and had speakers and designers and people just come talk about ADUs. So I think that was a very successful mobilization effort.
Wonderful, great. Those are all great examples. It's interesting because we have, we as realtors, we're the largest trade association in the United States, and we sell homes, and that's what we do for a living. Yet we're having a housing crisis, and we need to connect more with our community and get more involved so that we can help spur that growth in development and housing. So thank you for those wonderful examples. I think we're now going to switch, for the sake of time. Tom Burke Jr., our vice chair, has some wonderful questions to ask. Even though we could spend more time on this topic, we want to get to those questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom.
Why, thank you, Brett. I appreciate that. And what I'd like to do is talk about initial steps to advancing a proposal. And I'd like to start by start the discussion at square one. And I'd like to ask each of you to please discuss your organization, how your organization determines specific objectives that you are seeking. And also, can you discuss the process that goes into brainstorming a particular proposal? And Lyric, would you be so inclined to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom. So one of the things that we find, because like the street vendor campaign, for example, is a really specific thing, and that actually started from understanding the need of the community. And there were two major things that were happening. First, we knew that folks were being, street vendors were having their stuff taken from them, and they were being harassed and harmed, and that's obviously really terrible. And at the same time, there was a group of food advocates who were thinking through different ways to celebrate the culture of Los Angeles, and they're thinking about a street food fair effectively. And someone brought up like, oh, you know what, street vending is actually illegal. And so that's just like one example of identifying the explicit need. And so the research behind any coalition, I think, and this has been true for other coalitions we've been part of, is really understanding the people that we want to serve and being able to talk to the people that we want to serve and understand what it is that they're seeing and figuring out how we can fill that gap. And that might mean that it's not me specifically who's leading that. It might be figuring out who the right people are to talk to, the other experts in the field who are already doing this work. And I think that's a really important component, especially when you're talking about something as critical as housing. There are so many folks working in this space. So who are the other people who are thinking about it, and how are the ways that you can connect with them to make sure that you're incorporating those ideas and really serving the folks who are trying to get into homeownership, right? And so is it like specific targeted audiences, or is it a specific location? And then being able to ask the questions around how do you fill those gaps that you're seeing?
Great, thank you. Sienna, do you have any thoughts on that?
Excuse me. Yes. 1 second. Let me drink. I was so eager to share, I lost my voice. So CHIP rarely leads advocacy efforts to create or advance policy. And I think like many of you here today, we rely on our partners like the California Association of Realtors or your local association to create the structure and provide guidance. But that said, because I'm a board member on both the California Coalition for Rural Housing and National Rural Housing Coalition, I've seen how the sausage gets made. And what I've seen is that advocacy organizations truly rely on their members to raise the issues that they're seeing on the ground. And then they are also able to follow what's happening in the state legislature and Congress. But they need to hear from members how these policies are impacting them, what's happening in the community, what would it make it easier for members to do business, to have an impact. And then if enough members are having the same problem, that's when we pursue finding a policy solution. And then, there's different methods. If we're hoping that it's something that can be passed by a legislator, we start shopping for a sponsor based on established relationships, and then leaning on relationships that members have with their elected officials. And then if it's a ballot initiative, then, it requires hiring a research organization, poll public opinion and things like that. And then a lot of what we do is also kind of at the programmatic level. So advocating with the staff at various state agencies for tweaks that make it easier. So we build. So we're about, you know, being able to build and being able to do that. So that's what we're looking for, is funding, making it easier to build. And so those are kind of that's the start of the process. What is the problem? What are people seeing? And then how do we fix it?
Thank you, Sienna. Rich, any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, Tom, I wish I could say the right answer to this would be, you know, we get focus groups together, we survey our members and the public, and we go out and we, you know, do the research. But, you know, I think we're opportunists in this market, the way things are right now. For the most part, in policy space, we're on the defensive, you know, so we're defending. And then when it comes to find a place where maybe we can strike and do something positive, it's usually something opportunistic, you know, so it's a matter of, I guess I cut my teeth in politics going door to door. We didn't really have polls, you know, in when you first start out and you're doing inexpensive campaigns, you poll by knocking on doors and talking to voters, and you find out what they want and what they need. So that's kind of the way that I work with our leadership, is we go out and we just talk to members, and we're constantly engaging with them. And we try to identify brokers, top producing agents, and people who are involved in the community to kind of bring those ideas to fruition. And then what we do, and what I like to do, is find a realtor champion, you know, someone who's really passionate about an issue, who will take that issue to the next step and then try to find funding. You know, the National Association of Realtors has some great grants that they provide. So like one of our directors, Rafael Perez, has applied for a number of grants, you know, and the association has supported him and empowered him to really move the ball forward on some different issues. You know, so I think, yeah, opportunistic. We look for something and then we kind of go after that. You know, after the state passes a law, maybe we can capitalize on it. If you know, if we see, you know, a need, you know, some of the state laws around density bonuses, we did some great work getting some of the laws changed in the county to increase density bonuses when those laws change. But it really takes a realtor or a couple of realtors to get behind and really take that ball and run with it.
Thanks, Rich. So after a proposal has been outlined, what are the next steps that each of your organizations advances to ensure that the goal is actually met? And are there specific timelines for the objective? And I'll just throw that one out to any of the three of you, and then ask for follow-up from the others.
You know, when you apply for the grants with NAR, they have a specific format that you go through, and you have accountability. You need to do some reporting at the end of the grant. And fortunately, you know, there's a little bit of flexibility. I think with these things, you know, policy moves slowly. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to move. But I think you set goals, you try to hit those goals, but you have to be flexible in achieving them.
Sienna, Lyric, anything to add to that?
I think I'd just add that it also just depends on the goal. So not in addition to being flexible with the goal, it depends on what it is that you're asking for. So if it comes with a budget ask, then you're talking about working on the budget timeline of government. So for example, yesterday, I'm based in LA, and a lot of our advocacy work is based here. And yesterday, the state of the city came out, and earlier this week, the LA County budget came out. And so these conversations happen throughout the year. And if I'm trying to ask for a budget allocation for 2021, I'm probably too late at this point, but this is a really good time for me to start thinking about that for 2022 and beyond. And so if we're thinking about something like that, you have to think about the government timelines. If you're trying to get some sort of like new motion passed at the local level, the way that we usually approach it is like we kind of figure out what steps we need to take in order to get that passed, and then work backwards from there. So who are the people we need to talk to? How long will it take to get to those folks? Who do they need to talk to? And what's going to be the turnaround time? And really think through that to determine the timeline.
Yeah, and I think that the next step for me and us is to identify those champions, as Rich had mentioned, and start building that coalition. Who are those partners who are going to be on the ground supporting you, sharing your message, making sure that it gets out there? And then just like Lyric said, you kind of start with like the timeline of when you want something to happen and work back to figure it out. And she said 10 years to get it passed. That's not atypical, right? But those are the next steps from my opinion.
So how do each of you get communities to become engaged with the work that you are doing? And I mean, do you have any specific events that your organization hosts, or how much of a factor does social media, newsletter messaging play a role into this?
No, Tom, we partner with the chambers of commerce, and we do regular, events on water, infrastructure. We partner with the South County Economic Development Council in our area. And we try to do events and engage people, but I really think you can't underestimate the champion, the person who gets behind the issue, because that person, especially if they come up with the idea and then you're supporting them with that idea, you have someone driven to make it succeed. Some organizations, I think, they brainstorm and they come up with an idea and then they tell the members, hey, make this happen. And if you go and you tell somebody you want someone else to succeed at what your vision is, they don't really own it. So I think when you have somebody who owns something, they can really help you engage with the people because they own that issue. They'd have egg on their face if it wasn't successful.
Lyric, Sienna?
The skill set needed is very similar to what it takes, how realtors build their business, right? So there's the relationship building, there's the marketing, there's the storytelling, there's all of those things that you need to do to, get people to buy into the idea. And so every single tool that we have is important to get the buy-in that you need. I mean, nonprofits, it's what we do for fundraising, it's what you all do to build your business, and it's what advocacy groups do to move a policy idea forward. And yes, social media is important, having the good story, and then having easy ways for members to disseminate and share. So making it bite-sized, having it just easily digestible by the general public. I think those are the key factors.
So as we all know, getting community buy-in at times can be difficult and challenging at best, as community interested parties find it hard to engage on specific issues because of the time commitments. And with COVID bringing more technological resources to our disposal to engage with more folks and methods not previously used, how were each of your organizations taken advantage of, or how have each of your organizations taken advantage of this newer medium of communication? And do you see your organization using it more frequently?
So to be totally honest, Tom, it's actually been really difficult for a lot of the folks that we work with. So the small businesses, the entrepreneurs that we work with may not be super tech savvy and wouldn't be able to access something like a Zoom. And so there's a technical assistance component that's associated with it. And it's really highlighted what we call the digital divide. So there's so many folks we're trying to reach who just, it's just easiest to see them in person. And so having to it's like a brick wall. We had to stop in-person interactions with folks, and then we had to move on to this online platform. So being able to talk through things like how to take a picture and scan a document with your phone over the phone or over Zoom or something like that is really difficult for someone who might not have had that training. And that's frankly the vast majority of our base. And so we're hoping that moving forward, we'd be able to utilize these new technologies, but to be quite frank, it's actually been quite an inhibition for a lot of the people that we've been serving. And so we're just trying to figure out how we can coordinate better ways. And that's turned out to be like when we hold webinars or whatever it might be, we tape them we broadcast them on Facebook or Instagram or other more accessible social media platforms that folks might be using so that it can get a wider reach.
Yeah, Tom, I find I find it's easier to reach a lot of people quickly, but I question the level of engagement. You know, if we turned on all the cameras for everyone that's on on this call right now, you know, I know myself, you know, if there's someone important that I'll take a call from, I'll probably take the call while one of these webinars are going on. But if I was in the room with you right now, and I was in that audience listening to this panel, I don't think I would take that call. And I'd probably be a little bit more prepared for the meeting, because I would be afraid after the meeting, your Dave Walsh would call me to the side and say, hey, Rich, what do you think about this? And I didn't read the material, you know, and I think that face-to-face contact really builds engagement. So while I think there's opportunities with this medium, I really do. You can have quick meetings, you can get people together, you can organize. I don't want to discount the value of connecting with people face to face. I just think there's a lot of value in that.
I agree with that, Rich. I think that's very important.
I just ditto across the board.
So we also have regional challenges. All communities have different ones, and I'd like to ask if each of you would please discuss some of the challenges that each of your communities face and what efforts your organizations have engaged in to create solutions to the regional problems that that you've experienced. And specifically, local jurisdictions have their unique challenges. Local governments play a key role in ensuring that a proposal is either likely or widely adopted, or they can forward a proposal. So what, if any, challenges have you faced within your local communities?
You know, we had a project, and this happens regularly. Last year, you know, it was a couple hundred units, infill development in the city of Chula Vista, and it got blocked by one of the labor unions through a CEQA lawsuit. You know, and those types of things are really frustrating, because you build the support of the council, you get some support in the community, you have some opposition in the community, but then a lawsuit like the CEQA lawsuits are very, very difficult to deal with. And I think it creates such a questionable future for a lot of the developers who want to invest in that type of thing, that they don't take the risk again in the future, because there's just too many unknowns. That's a huge issue right now.
Lyric, Sienna?
So I think for us, being in a rural community and also being an affordable housing developer, is that historically there's been a misunderstanding of what affordable housing means. It's really a broad term. It does encompass everything from a homeless shelter to entry-level single-family home. And I think that what we've seen with the housing crisis in California is that affordability is important to everyone at all income levels, and that having housing that's available to people from very low income to middle income to upper income, it creates a local economy where people are able to find good housing at a price that they can afford. There's choices, and it makes for stronger communities. And in rural communities, for a long time, our housing was relatively affordable. And so there was a lack of intentional investment in creating more affordable housing. But gradually, you know, our housing prices went up, wages weren't matching it. And, you know, and then we've had all of these fires. And so we are in a full-blown crisis that's comparable to urban communities such as the Bay Area and LA. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the rural communities.
You know, I'd echo what you're saying and just say that, like, one of the really difficult components is the rhetoric that we try and fight. So there's a lot of misinformation that gets thrown around probably, you know, around every topic, but especially things around street vendors or small businesses or, you know, micro entrepreneurs. And then also around housing, we see it too with a lot of our allies too. And I think one of the ways that we try and combat that is providing just like clear data that showcases it showcases how we can help fix these solutions through the policies that we're proposing. And then the other thing I'd say at the regional level too, and I believe everybody on this call deals with everything from state down to local jurisdiction issues. Is there ways that you can have all of these policies, frankly, facilitated in an easier way at every single one of these levels? So, we just have to understand exactly what the target is for the state versus the county versus the city, and be able to really pinpoint that issue and express it clearly with the data that we're able to come up with, instead of having to it's just hard when you have to fight against a slew of rhetoric that just isn't true, that isn't true. And so, that's what I'd add.
Interesting.
And as far as statewide efforts, many of the proposals that the state often adopt begin at the local level. So how have your organizations pushed for statewide policy?
Well, I mentioned AB 880, which is a new bill. We wanted to bring it forward last year, but because of COVID, most bills weren't heard. And so this is an effort that has been led by California Coalition for Rural Housing with support from our member organizations and partner agencies and Assembly member C.A.R. Curry. And it is grassroots, from all of us in the Sonoma and Ventura and communities where, we've lost housing and we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for money to come. And knowing that if we were able to respond more quickly, these communities could be restored more quickly. And so right now it's passed out of committee with bipartisan support. And so we'll see how it progresses, but it is something that would positively impact all communities across the state.
And Lyric, same question to you. How has your organization pushed for a statewide policy?
Yeah, I would just echo components of what Shauna is saying in terms of the it's really a lot about partnership building, because she was talking about how many different folks are involved in this. And when we've tried to get state legislation passed or pass state legislation, it's really been because of these partnerships across California. It's not just Los Angeles. We're based in LA, but we have friends across the state to be able to help push forward equitable policy. And I'll tie it back to something I said at the very beginning, that it really has to be rooted in the people that you're trying to serve. So the best policies are going to work when you're, so for example, in this group, of course, first-time homeowners, what is it that first-time homeowners need in order to and how do you center that in a policy to make sure that it's passed and it truly serves them? And that requires actually talking to and having those folks at the table when you're thinking about the policy, and making sure that they're the ones talking to legislators was really key for that. We passed the Safe Sidewalk Vending Act a couple of years ago that decriminalized sidewalk vending across the state. And it's really, I would just take it back to those two major things of just coalition building and centering the voices of the folks that you're trying to affect with policy.
And Rich, what about you? How has your organization helped push for statewide policies, and how have statewide policies allowed your organization to reach specific objectives?
Tom, our organization, when it comes to statewide policy, we really lean on C.A.R. Our mission is to empower realtors. And at one point it was to empower our members, and the board made an actual conscious decision to change that mission to empower realtors, period. So what that means is, we have to work within the state organization to make those things happen. So if there's something that we want to move, right now we're working with Jennifer Speck, a couple of my realtors are working on HOA issues, and we're working through the lobbyists on the C.A.R. team, and we're going to hopefully, bring it up in committees and talk about it through the process. And that's kind of how we'll try to move some legislation through. But we consider ourselves a partner with C.A.R. and NAR, and sometimes our board and our members disagree with C.A.R. policy, But rather than go out and oppose it, we consider ourselves part of the organization. We kind of bite our tongue and say, you know what, we'll remain quiet on this one, but we're partners. We're going to work together and work for the bigger good. And sometimes that's not very popular locally, but that's the decision our board took and the direction we take generally.
Sure. Brett, Vanessa,
Okay.
how are we doing on time?
Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you, panelists. So we're going to have a closing statement. I'd like to ask you one more question, and then we'll open it up to our realtors for question and answer session. So what is one piece of advice that you would leave to those seeking new ways to execute successful policy innovative campaigns? What piece of advice would you leave to our viewers today? And any of you can start.
I'll start. I think one thing that mature political operatives realize is not to create enemies. So when you're in your community, don't call XYZ group an enemy. We had an issue where one of the cities, and this actually came up in a couple of cities, they wanted to start including sewer bills in the tax roll, which actually hurts the financing for people trying to buy a home. And we had a great relationship with one of our mortal enemies when it came to NIMBYism in one of the cities. And we actually talked to them about that issue. And the city council could not oppose both of us. I mean, both the NIMBYs and the realtors opposing that issue. We found an ally in that issue. So I think, and part of that little things, I remember one of the women who was on that group, I drove her home from a council meeting and her car broke down. I was like, be happy to drive you home. I think building those bridges and those relationships, you never know who you oppose on an issue today, who you might be able to work with sometime in the future with.
Great, great. Lyric or Shauna?
I think it's kind of tied to what Rich is saying, but I would say kind of death of the ego. And that's that I cannot be the expert of everything. And I need to and this is something we constantly talk about is figuring out who an expert is. And the traditional term of expert, it's like, I'm a trained urban planner and stuff like that, but do I really know what needs to happen? Like, do I know what a brick and mortar business goes through when they're trying to get their permits and stuff like that? So am I the right person to really be uplifting those policy changes? And so I would say really to Rich's point is like, make sure that you're making partnerships with folks that you wouldn't traditionally make partnerships with, and understand that you just can't be you can't have the answer to every question, and there's other people who do have the answer. And so be able to talk to those folks.
Great.
And
Shauna?
I think that it's just like the 1-2 punch between us, because my piece of advice was don't do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. I am not a policy wonk. I rely on our partners, on the coalitions that I am a member of, to kind of track what's going on and share that information. And I think that that's why we become parts of coalitions or organizations like the ones that you represent here, and that together we're stronger. We can share our on the ground experience, what we're doing on the ground, and marry it with those people who like reading legislation. So partnership is the most important thing.
So I kind of see a common theme that it seems like collaboration is vitally important. I've heard that kind of over and over today in this forum, is collaboration. And then Lyric, you had mentioned the fact that we need clear, concise information and flow of information between agencies or partnerships, because that can be an issue if we don't have that information, or it's not communicated clearly, or there's a misunderstanding. So it really seems like the common thread here is that collaboration. So now, Vanessa, were there any other comments that the three of you would like to make before we go to our question and answer?
Can I just add one thing about the partnership
Absolutely.
component? I think that folks tend to shy away from confrontation, but frankly, you can't have progress with only consensus. You make progress by having the difficult conversations and understanding that there's going to be pulls and tensions among folks, especially when you're talking about policy and especially as it relates to housing. And so really talking to the people who have those tensions and teasing them out is only going to make the collaboration and the coalition stronger. That's the only thing I'd add to the partnership component.
Okay, great. Great. Any other comments, Shauna or Rich? Okay, great. So Vanessa, can we open this up to question and answer?
If you have a question for any of the panelists, feel free to raise your hand and by clicking the raise hand feature, and you'll be recognized to speak, or you can just submit it in the chat.
You know, we did have a question in the typed here. What should today's biggest takeaway be? You know, if you're going to go back to your region, you're going to talk about this meeting, what would be the biggest takeaway?
Would you like to answer that, any of you? How can you help our local associations? What is a takeaway that, what bit of information or statement can you make that we can take back to our local associations to help realtors engage and be part of the process? What about you, Shauna?
I think that for people who don't spend the majority of their time doing this, engaging in advocacy, engaging in policy, it can feel overwhelming. And that maybe you don't have the expertise to speak out or move a policy agenda forward. But that's not true. The lived experience of people in the community is incredibly important and the most effective in moving a policy item forward. And that's kind of why I was saying you don't have to do it alone, rely on your partners. So you don't have to be, and actually like Lyric said, you don't have to be an expert in everything to move it forward. That's where you have that group where you rely on each other's strengths. So don't be afraid or intimidated. Everyone can engage in advocacy.
Well, it's interesting because, we sell a product and that's real estate. And there's a big disconnect, between realtors and what it takes to create more housing. And we want to get our realtors more involved in creating that supply of housing because that's our lifeblood. So what about you, Lyric? What are your comments regarding that question?
I would echo what Shauna said. And Brett, I think you actually pulled it out from our last sentiments too, of just like, there's real power in the coalition building and partnerships because we simply can't do it alone. And then I really appreciate that Shauna lifted up that we're, sometimes it is really intimidating. Like it's my full-time job to do advocacy and this kind of work. Whereas someone who has a separate job but is really passionate about an issue might just not know where to start. But really it's as simple as like sending an email saying like, hey, where do I go? Or doing some just like basic Google research, especially because in California, there are no lack of organizations that are doing work on these issues. So we're very blessed in that area to have a lot of folks who are working on these types of things.
Great. Yes.
I think that a takeaway local organization should have is sometimes you have to move an issue forward with a simple majority, but sometimes you really need to make a calculation as to whether or not that's wise, especially if it's something big that needs a lot of resources. I think organizations sometimes need to look at a supermajority before they want to represent their members on a big way, that they actually have buy-in from the supermajority. We had some issues with the ADU and we had to pick off certain members who were, vehemently opposed to ADUs in their city. The traffic, they had all the same, opposition. And I think in your organization, especially your board or your GA committee, that they're all unified in that mission, because you don't want somebody from the inside undermining something that you're doing, and that can be detrimental to moving something forward.
And Brett,
Yes.
you see we do have John Wong waiting to ask a question. So go ahead and go to John.
John, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And Chair Brett, I think that you kind of touched, I'm going to follow up on, in that it really is having a broader perspective than we as an individual has to get something done. Coalition was mentioned, really being able to see the perspective from the other advocacy positions is critical. Now, recently, in almost all the activities that the realtors have been involved in, the gut response on the internet and et cetera is the realtors only care about making more money themselves. Everything they're doing is just to get a deal for them. It's how do we appropriately message in that reality, what we debate in the board of directors is really for a broader good for communities. And then what are some strategies or ways that you have used to balance that? And then that's external. Internally, within the California Association of Realtors, how do we message to our members who are somewhat focused on just the transactional part to have them understand that if it's better for the community, it will ultimately lead to more business for a broader spectrum of practitioners. So, there's an internal, external, but how do we message that? Because right now with the internet, and you guys brought it up, people's attention span is in that 5-second, realtors just want to make more money. Realtors just want to make more money, or they're trying to stop you from making more money. Thank you.
That's a great question. Shauna, do you want to speak to that, to John?
I can't speak to the messaging guidelines, internal and external, for realtors, but I do think that there's opportunity for partnership with the affordable housing community that hasn't necessarily been there in the past, and where we talk about broader community good and, as I mentioned, a healthy community, and that affordability is important across incomes. And I think that's something that you all see on the ground, right? As people are struggling to make a down payment, or they're trying to find that home and it's getting snatched up out from under them with multiple offers or cash offers. I mean, it's just nuts in most communities right now. And so, part of it is increasing the supply of all types of housing, but also communicating how a diverse community is a healthy community, and creating those alliances with organizations such as ours that aren't always the first go-to alliance. Although I will say that our association up in Northern California is very supportive, as we talked about Peggy, Mead, and now Andrew.
So would you say, kind of in a nutshell, Shauna, to John's point, it's a communication issue in getting across that we aren't just selling houses to make money, but there's a bigger interest in what we do for a living. There's a larger scope.
It's part of communication, but it's also, I think, action, right? So what are individual realtors doing to support the broader community? How are they out there as volunteers, as philanthropists? How are they moving forward community issues that are important around schools and things where there's that intersection between housing and community? And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for realtors to be leaders in that space, because a lot of people, right? I mean, you're people. And so, I think it's communication, but it's also action, and being out there and being seen.
Great. Lyric or Rich, would either one of you want to speak to John's question?
I chimed in on John's meeting, the previous one. I really think some of our messaging going forward, we're doing a lot of advocacy right now for housing, and I don't think we shouldn't do that. But I do think there are a lot of organizations already taking, the tip of the spear is not us on rental housing. And I think I think we really need to be talking about that middle section. So in the last, I don't know how many of you made the last meeting, they talked about the housing advocacy groups, those people who are making $20,000 a year, where are they going to live? We need to have rental housing for them, but we need to be finding a place when they're making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. What can they buy? And whether it's a partial ownership or, I don't know what that answer is, or it's a small, very small unit. But I think for diverse communities, they can't build intergenerational wealth until they have a piece of the American dream. And I think that's a safe space. And I think that's a good message for us as an organization. I think we need to be thinking about how we do that. And then Vanessa, there are a couple of questions here for me. Should I answer these or?
Sure, you can go ahead and answer those. I think that
Vanessa, excuse me, this is John again. I'm going to make one last comment, then I'll mute myself. At the last board of directors meeting, toward the end, Kevin Brown, as head of a work group or task force, I forget which one, presented a very detailed, rather long document on C.A.R.'s political and policy strategies moving forward. It was at the end of the meeting, and I kind of read it through, and it was inspiring because I think the California Association of Realtors recognizes in that document, if we move forward on it, the need for alliances, and in fact, the need for relationships and partnerships with groups that we have not partnered with before. So I think that what you guys are discussing now is that openness to at least frame it out in such a way that we become even more effective with helping housing in California. So I applaud the comments on this panel and really that you thought of having this subject at all. So thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists. Okay, back to you. And thank you, John. Thank you so much for your comments. We really appreciate that. So should we go back to Rich? Do you want to answer some of the questions that you're seeing there?
It kind of ties into that last question there's a question here, have you ever partnered with tenant unions? And unfortunately, our county is moving towards rent control and we're fighting it like crazy. We beat it in one of our cities 2 years ago. And I think part of their goal is to create tenant unions. So I think that's actually the goal. But if we had a tenant union, I think I would try to partner with them. And I think the message, like right now, we need to talk to them about being able to evict bad tenants. Some of these people in these tenant unions, what happens when they have bad tenants? Some of the housing groups, ACE is one of the groups in our area, is telling their members not to communicate with property owners. And our property owners, our housing providers are able to, if they're that whole new law with the 80%, 20%, a lot of tenants don't realize that they can have a major portion, they can have the rent waived, but they're so afraid to talk to their landlord. So anyway, I've never worked with a tenant union, but I think it would be worth trying to if you can. At one point, I was a manager at AT&T, and I had a labor crew. So the crew was union, I was management, and it was interesting because everyone that's member of a union doesn't always agree with the union. So I think you can talk to them, and I think it's worthwhile having a conversation, and maybe at some point you work together. And then there's a staff-driven policy for a rent registry. Who, in your opinion, other than realtors and apartment building owners, could be good coalition members to defeat the policy? Maybe that's a good question for Shauna or Lyric.
Shauna, Lyric, would you like to weigh in on that? No, Shauna's no. Okay, great. So for the sake of time, because we only have about 6 minutes, I think there's a question from Howard to Lyric. Is that correct, Vanessa?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you see that question, Lyric?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
So for folks listening in, Howard had asked a question around neighborhood councils and engaging with them. And this is specific to Los Angeles. And how we've seen them either help or hurt an issue. And so just for folks who don't know, neighborhood councils are like a more local elected body within the city of Los Angeles. And I believe there are 99 across the city of LA. So they're much smaller jurisdictions than the 15 council members. And they have an elected body, and they are advisory by nature, so they can submit different impact statements and their own statements on different issues. But I do want to say we have worked with a handful of neighborhood councils on a handful of different issues. And I think their statements are powerful, and providing them and what it is that they need to the city council, depending on the topic, is really useful. And then we've also actually, for some of the neighborhood councils that are in areas that we typically serve, we've partnered with them for workshops. And so like helped get word out and information out to different folks, depending on what the topic is. So we've done a handful of them on street vending. I want to say we've actually done a handful because we are a CDFI, so we do small business loans. And so we've done a couple on that as well. And I think they can really impact a different topics based on what it is that they're seeing within their neighborhoods. That being said, again, they are advisory, so they don't actually hold teeth to their statements. But I do think they're a really good group because it's like the closest elected jurisdiction that you can get to the people, because city council members represent like 300,000 people in the city of LA, but whereas a neighborhood council elected body only represents like I think it's like 30 or 40,000. So it's a much closer to the people type group.
Great, thank you. I hope that kind of answered the question. Vanessa, do you want to kind of take it from here as to, we've got more people chatting and
we do, but we have a hard stop at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to just go ahead and turn it back over to you, Brett and Tom, to have some concluding remarks. And thank you everyone so much for taking the time to be a part of this panel. We appreciate your time and thank you once again.
Okay, thank you panelists for being here. You have a plethora of knowledge, and once again, I wish that we could be on this Zoom call for a couple of hours. And I appreciate all those who attended the Public Policy Forum today. And I think that if people have questions or for the panelists, Vanessa, they can reach out to these panelists. Is that correct?
Yes, the information is posted on the C.A.R. website in case you have additional questions on anything that they mentioned specifically on the questions that were asked by Brett and Tom.
Okay, once again, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Tom, for all your participation today. And panelists, take care and thank you again.